Thank you, Kate and Ed. We're going to be transitioning now to our keynote, and it is with great pleasure that we were able to have David Smith, who is a recognized strategic futurist. I met David over 15 years ago, actually in Beijing, China, of all places, when I was working for Accord. And he was a keynote speaker, I was a speaker, and we started talking about what we were both talking about that, and our discussion has never stopped since. So we have continued to stay in touch. We've had the opportunity to be at the same conferences many times. When I have an opportunity to be over in the UK, we often try to get together. And for those of you that got the email ahead of conference, we did a joint paper together. David and I spent some time talking about what's happening in the industry from his view, from our view. And so he wrote the paper and we provided our viewpoint with references to our research as well. And I think you're going to find him to be a very engaging, very delightful, and very thought-provoking individual. And for those of you that participated in the little survey or the little questionnaire, he's going to give some insights and the overall results of that questionnaire that we had you fill out. So with that, David, please join us here on stage.
Good morning. Good. Some people have described listening to me as a bit like drinking through a hosepipe. A lot of words come at you very rapidly, a lot of information, and the first thing is that all of my slides are available to all of you. So you needn't take notes specifically on what's on there, and they're all hot linked to something. It's interesting we talk about change so much. Heraclitus, 2,500 years ago, talked about the only change is constant. And we're living our bit, and it seems excessive. And also the other reference to Renaissance was amazing, because that was a time of enormous scientific, creative, and artistic development and enhancement. And we're living that era again. They'll look back on this time and see mass change all arriving at the same time. It's quite exciting. I'm hoping I pretty much bring to you almost nothing. Now, I know that's slightly disappointing, but I'm sure in some way or another you're already camped on some of this ground and thinking about the implications about what some of these technologies or changes in behaviors can feel like. So, to take a step back, I asked Denise if we could share with you our little indicator, which gives us a clue as to who you are. And it was quite insightful. So if you've done it, thank you very much. If you haven't, there's always time. If you're bored with what I'm saying, you can do it while we're in the room, and I don't mind. I'll check it later on. And it tells us a little bit about how we view the future. And there was a time when we saw the future in these terms. There's today and tomorrow. And actually, in many ways, that's not very helpful, because somebody's tomorrow is somebody else's way off in the distance. And it doesn't really help us examine things. So we did something absolutely amazing. We divided up time into today, tomorrow, and the future. So at least today we manage, tomorrow we lead people to where we're going, and then in the future we have some sort of vision of what it might be like. And that's probably where you are as organizations. You have a fixed view of what you need to get done today. You have a vision perhaps of what's happening way out in the future, and you've got some fixed numbers and objectives to achieve for tomorrow. So we have managers who run things, we have leaders who take people forward, and we have entrepreneur thinkers, if you like, visionary thinkers, who are usually a bit of a menace inside the organization, but by and large they're quite good at being headlights. They bring illumination and vision as to what's coming. So we thought that was a good way of looking at it, and it maps on pretty accurately on the 3 horizon model. And many of you will use that in your firms, I have no doubt, to project what you're doing now, what's going to happen way out when, and what you might have to do in the middle to be successful. So it's a model that everybody knows is very appropriate for this time. So we mapped it onto this framework. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but effectively it divides into manager, leader, entrepreneur. And the manager gets things done, which is brilliant, and we love them to pieces. The leader helps people understand what's coming next and takes them forward into the next thing, the next goal, the next objective, the next horizon. And the visionary thinks about what that might look like in terms of value and culture and what foresight we're camping on. And all of you will have that sort of division inside your firms to some degree or another. If we think about how we get things done, there's a quadrant down here that says this is about getting stuff done, about capability and models and cycles. And we talk about it a great deal and sort of behaviors we need to run to get things finished in our businesses. It's how to do things right, effectively. Over here is a quadrant that's all about what we need to do to look beyond the horizon. How can we really, if you like, undermine what we do today by bringing new thoughts and new ideas into the firm without changing the cash flow of our business, how damaging ourselves. So we said, okay, in our questionnaire, which worked unbelievably accurately, I might tell you, so I'm sorry about that. It's quite good at telling us who we are, if you like. So who are we as an audience? Well, we are primarily, 55% of us at least, are clearly in that operational mindset, or at least in that mindset when you completed this questionnaire. It'd be interesting to do it at the end of this week and see how you respond, because I have a suspicion you'll probably change your mindset slightly, and this is what this is about. And where we are right now, about 25% of us in the room are in that more visionary, entrepreneurial, forward-thinking mode, and we need to shift that, if you like, in terms of our thinking, our attitude, our behavior, to make all of this happen, because it's us that make the difference. And what we found in the survey, there was one person in this room who filled out the survey this time who was a pure entrepreneur. So in terms of your business and your vision, then you have the capability to take your firm forward and have a clear vision. And there's one person also in this room, which is Denise, who has an entrepreneur mindset. She has that visionary approach, and that's coming from our measuring system. So it's really interesting that we've got two people in the room who are going to listen to what I've got to say. Okay, so I better go back a bit and change it to what we already know. So let's think about how good we are at thinking about data processing. Look, this was the manager of Prentice Business Books saying data processing is a fad that won't last the year, and that was 1957. You've probably all heard about computers, yeah? Yeah, they sort of matter in terms of what we do, and they've changed things. So that wasn't quite as right as it might have been. So let's have a think about the telephone. When the first telephone came out, Western Union, the world's largest electronic communication company, said in 1876, this is inherently no use to communications device. Brilliant. They ultimately got bought by the Bell Telephone Company. So it's really easy to see new technologies as not what their potential is, but what it is now. And that's the trick we've got to get used to doing. How can we imagine what these technologies might become? And just one more thing, perhaps. Looking at the launch of the iPhone, a commentator in New York said, there probably will never be an Apple telephone. That was in the year before it was released. Brilliant. So we've sold 1 billion of those, and after it was released, Steve Ballmer said they will never take any market share. They now take 91% of the market profitability of all smartphones. So it's unbelievable how even experts in their field can see something unbelievably close, 1 year away, 6 months away, or even what's already in front of us and get it wrong. So you don't need a futurist, right? Sure. So telling you what's coming isn't actually the issue. The issue is, what can we do with the things that are already in front of us, or the things we already recognize? Because often we don't recognize them for what they truly are. And this is a lovely quote I like from an economist: it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. And I wish it was written up in many places when you're doing strategic planning. Who does strategic planning? Oh, come on, you've got to say yes to this one. Yeah, we all do strategic planning, we all think ahead. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not a project, is it? But anyway, better be roughly right than precisely wrong. But very often we express where we're going in an Excel spreadsheet with numbers. And we don't use the range field. Who uses the range field? One. I was going to say talk to someone, there's no point. But the range field tells us the future isn't something we can actually analyze down to a fixed number. We might wish it was, and we might create other fields around it that are upper and lower. But the range field gives us that idea that the future is variable, and our attitude to the future has to be variable. So what I like is this, is the society of actuaries that you will get, and it couldn't be further from the futurist thinking, says that most risk is strategic risk. Not what you do operational, not finance, what you did. It's strategic. What are you doing as a business? That is where most risk of failure comes from. And Drucker always said that the biggest risk is when the market moves and we don't. And very often you see companies who are beginning to fail because what they're offering isn't valid or relevant, and increasingly they spend more money on marketing, more money on all forms of thought leadership and trying to get their product known, and eventually go bust. And probably Twinkie's the best example of that. What's wrong with people? Why don't they buy my high-fat food? Well, we moved on from that. We wanted something better. And finally, about half of the companies who died between 2000 and 2010 were Fortune 500 companies in that era. Half died for digital platforms, for digital reasons. So digital is fantastic. It's also a time of change. And this is one from Cisco, from Chambers. And he says, roughly, we could say that about 40% of companies will die in the next 10 years. And this is important. So if you take 40% of companies, it's about there. So you're all working for companies that are going to die. Well, that's not very comfortable, no. You're all working, not you, but you're all working for companies that are going to die. It's not comfortable. We enormously have a view that our company will survive forever. And all the evidence is, even from the Society of Actuaries, all the evidence is your company will cease to exist. So actually what we have to do is something quite dramatic to make sure it doesn't become part of that 40%. That's the key message. Kendrick said this, and he was one of the first executives, and he's at Chubb, and president of ACE, and said, or vice president of ACE, said, we're living on a burning platform in the insurance industry, and we're leading into a slow decline into irrelevance. And I quote those words because he's done something since to his business because of that. He recognizes that the technologies and the use of those technologies are going to undermine the very nature of what he does. And he has to rethink the whole business that they're in, which is what they're doing. But what I love this other view is that by 2025, and I was asked to think about 2025, increasingly it's not our product, but it's the experience we bring our customer. But will it be an experience of buying a product and being serviced by a product? What will it be in around 8, 9, 10 years' time? What will the customer be experiencing that we want to offer so we're not part of that 40%? So I thought we'd look at these 7 categories. Well, that's not true. There are 7 major categories that drive change, and we're going to hit 5 of those in the next 40 minutes. Can you cope? I like that. There's signs of life. It's good. This is a model of the volume of people in the world. The good news is, broadly speaking, when I was born, there were 2 billion people. When I went to work, there were 3. There's 7 today. In the next 20 years, by 2025, we'll be 8.1 billion, about 1 billion more people. So we're very good at creating people. Yeah? We're very good at creating people. We're getting better at the people we create staying alive and becoming economically active, and they're doing that in places they weren't before. So the green bit at the bottom are the developed economies, and the purple bit are where people are being born and staying alive and becoming economically active where they never were before. So nothing is the same to the way it was. Nothing. In one generation, we are seeing a massive change in where we are in the world and where the economy is and how we perform and how we operate and what culture we live in, and that is changing so much of the way things work. The consequence is, and of that, and we are already experiencing, is that we're going to see about treble the global economic activity in the next few decades. And what's the global GDP this year? That's a real question, gives me a break. Shout it out when you've got an idea. Right, there's nobody in marketing. When you're in marketing, you start with the world GDP and you work down to your bit. No, you don't really, but that's how you should do it. It's about $86 trillion US. So we're talking about another $170 trillion US in the next few decades. And it isn't where it used to be because people aren't where they used to be. And they're not behaving in the usual way. So even if you do nothing, as Drucker said, your market will have moved. Now, you don't have to move out of the United States, but globally, the center of activity economically is moving elsewhere. These red bits are where, if you like, we're overheating in terms of economic activity and global growth. And that means we shift the model and the makeup of how the world works. And ultimately, that leads to political influence, which we have to work with around the world. And maybe initial markets aren't where they used to be. So moving on very rapidly, well, the good news is we have to build a lot of built environment for people to live in that new world. So we think roughly in the next 20 years or 15 years, we need about $57 trillion US of infrastructure to be built. Massive opportunity. And over 60% of people will live in that built environment. And if you think about it, 75% of that doesn't exist today. What that tells me is we won't do it. We will not build a world in the way that it used to work for the world that's going to work. And it may be because of some technologies that will do things quite dramatically differently. The other factor to think about this in terms of people is aging is something we've all heard about, we all get, but broadly speaking, today, around about 10% of the world's population is over 60. But if you go forward to 2050 or thereabouts, we're going to be 20%. So we get from 700 million to 2 billion. And our attitude and behavior changes as we get older towards the things that we acquire, buy, use. And that is massively transforming many, many industries around the world, and our belief and value system that goes with it, not least of all our shareholders, our stockholders, can be made up of people with a very different mindset to those that we had in the past. So huge change. So we've done the world, we've done economics, and we've done people. Happy? No, overwhelmed already, you had it. There's loads to go yet. So insurance, what's going on? Look, we all believe there's massive change. It doesn't take anybody up here to stand and say that we expect enormous change in the next few years. But many people are also beginning to say that most of that change is moving from products to outcomes. And how we achieve those outcomes are quite different to the way we initially sold products. And by the way, I'm a great believer in insurance, that it is the most noble industry in the world. I think it has one of the worst reputations, but it actually allows people to do things in their lives they would never do if they had to bear the entire risk. You would never buy a house if it might get burnt down and you spend the rest of your life paying the mortgage. There are many things we do that insurance enables, so it's a fantastically enabling transaction, but we haven't got that right. But the future, potentially, could make it the most loved industry on the planet. Now, in some worlds, you get a whoopee for that. Monday morning, don't smile, don't laugh, it's insurance, it's fine. Ed, you need to come back. A lot of the principles that have governed the way we work for the last couple of hundred years in insurance are changing. And we know that already. Technology is overloading us in so many ways. Just the ordinary data processing is hard enough to keep up with, let alone all these new gadgets, if you like, and devices and methods and approaches. Precautionary principles dying on the basis that we can't tell where technology is taking us. Market of one, because increasingly with cognitive computing and data and other attitudes, we can focus in on small groups or individuals and risk transfer, the same reason for technology. And of course, competition's coming from every angle you could possibly ever imagine from different industries as well as from new entrants and competitors. So there's an enormous amount of change. So we've got to love change, haven't we? Who loves change? Well, it's about 20%. That's good. That's about the entrepreneurial mindset I got in my response. That's about, I'm talking to you 20% now, okay? Anyway, moving forward, we're moving from a highly structured, tactical approach to responding to situations that occur in the insurance industry. Any risk, any claim that was put in, we responded to it. But we're very rapidly moving to a highly unstructured form of data with massive growth in that area, with strategic decision making, deciding what market we're in and what position we'll take, and increasingly making use of a preventative model where we stand up and help our clients become less at risk than they were at first. Rather than compensation, it's more preventative. And that is an enormous change. And either we do it or others will do it to our customers. And the value of our premium could be affected as a consequence. A lot of people don't have a data strategy. They don't have a digital strategy to put in place. And very few in the industry have specific offerings that were designed from the ground up around digital models. And I don't mean that in terms of the method of delivering it, but by the very means of what it is you offer. So enormous change is coming. We've endlessly seen charts like this, and we've seen the great waves of digital giants and leviathans coming into the industry and eating our lunch. But they come and they go and they come and they go over time. But eventually these things will rejig. And we're seeing that from all these thousands of companies that people have already mentioned, from 32,000 or 3,000 to 600 companies that Ed mentioned were being specifically looked at of the influence they could have. They're coming from nowhere, if you like, and they have got billions of investment. But the bottom line is, with all of that change, that much of that premium value could be undermined as we begin to blur the edges of what we offer our customer in terms of compensation and protection. So, in what way, that's all a bit doom and gloomy, I get that. So there's lots of change coming. And do you know, if I moved your tables now, it would be in 45 minutes of chaos as you got more comfortable at the next seat and wonder why I did it. We're actually not very good at immediate change. But over long term, we are brilliant at change. We absorb all manner of things, and we'll cover some of that in a minute. So customers are changing, and not least of all the millennials who are now beginning to become customers and members of staff, etc. They're increasingly disengaged with the old model of insurance, and they find that difficult to see relevance. On the other hand, that we're looking, and they're looking for, increasingly personalized experiences and personalized products, but at the same time, from an economy of scale, we need to standardize on the way we offer those products. So we've got this paradox between personalization and market of one versus the need to be able to market to many propositions and offers that we are being given. So where does that leave us? Well, the good news is that customers are very adaptive. You're very adaptive. Who's got a cell phone? You're not allowed out without one, are you? We've all got a cell phone. We've become so used to having a cell phone. And some of these things are good and some of these things are a bit of a challenge to us. The good news is we adopt new channels at the speed of light as customers, but we don't always get the same sort of offer from every one of our suppliers. And we like the ones that are avant-garde and creative and send us a new app and we can do something useful and effectively can make our life more successful. And those that don't get left behind, but they've done nothing different. They've just stayed the same. And we need to move with the speed at which people are happy to move. So let's think about the individual customer for a moment. So here you are doing whatever you do, and you come to a facility. So here's the lovely Marriott Hotel at Harbour in Fort Lauderdale. And because we're living in smart cities, increasingly our diaries are open, and people can access them for one reason or another. And with our trail of data, we know where we've been and what we've been looking at and what we're interested in. And ultimately, we know who's around us. So we know the context where everybody is at any moment in time. And that is going to allow us to make very specific offers to people that we never could before. And they could be transactions that are tiny. And they could be moments of pleasure where we can help people become more successful than we've never done before. This could be claims 1,000 times an hour. But they're not claims in a traditional sense. They're giving advice to people depending on their circumstances. Equally, if you hold data on individuals, but you don't know how to use it yet, ultimately the regulator will say you should have used it and you've missold a product. So we're beginning to see a really interesting scenario developing around data and holding data and analyzing data and what we'll be able to do with it in a very short while. I dare say IBM will be able to fill you in a great deal more about where that whole machine learning, cognitive computing thing is coming from and what it might allow us to do. Enormous change in how we adapt to individuals and their circumstances. For example, with this guy, we might say, you're within a few feet of where a robbery took place. And there's apps in New York, I was talking last night about this, there's apps in New York that'll tell you exactly that, but they're not provided by an insurance company. And that's the bottom line. All of these services that allow people to be more successful aren't necessarily coming from an industry that is designed to help you reduce risk. So risk management in itself is becoming a really interesting battleground. So knowing where people are, knowing what their situation is going to become increasingly important. And many of people expect that we will interdict risk for them and improve our lives. And as 92% in the last survey said we want that from our insurance makers. So how many of you help your customers be more successful on an hourly basis? 1, 2, 3. So 3 of you need to get together. So you're a working group. So we need to help our customers be more successful. And then we will become amazing word of mouth. How you help someone avoid risk, they stepped aside from something that could have happened to them, and increasing that word of mouth will get round and you'll become the most loved industry in the world. That's one of the ways anyway. So, customers are brilliant at adapting to change. That's the bottom line on this one. We are fantastic at changing, and I'll share with you some thoughts on that in just a moment. So a lot of this today and the next few days is about technology, and technology is completely changing what we do and how we do it. And that's the important thing about where we're at in our industries at any moment in time. We need to look at what technology would truly do to our business. Most folk, about 87%, say that tech will be disruptive in their industry, but only about 40% say they're prepared. So there's this huge gap between those that know that something's going to happen and those of us that are prepared and ready or even leading that change. And that can be quite uncomfortable. And that's where we've pretty much got to. And you've heard about some of these companies. They could be in fintech or instech, or they could be in AI or cognitive computing or machine learning, or they could be in marketing. So any one of these areas, there's technology awash coming towards us, and they coagulate together. They converge and then create whole new paradigms. And it's the convergence that's the exciting part. Or it could be retail if you're a customer experiencing that whole retail experience. Equally, it could be the Internet of Things. It could be sensors and devices and controls of one sort or another. Or it could be 3D printing or fabrication being in a completely different way than it ever was before, not least of all repairing devices and things using fabricators as opposed to whole-scale replacement. So we're seeing all these technologies coming at us by hundreds of companies with billions of dollars, enabling others to choose these options, and we need to pick our way through these in a very creative and thoughtful way. So it's great to be opportunistic with technology. It's great to find a technology we think will really transform what we do and how we do it. But it's even better to build a strategy with the knowledge of these technologies and the models that they generate, and then populate them with technology. So getting it around the right way is probably more important now than ever before, to have clear thinking about the way ahead and what we might be able to do. Having said that, very few of us are really very good at building people inside the business with a strong digital leadership program. Do we really understand all the aspects of digital so we can make wise choices about the way ahead? And actually, very few of us are very good at putting our mind and spending our time and attention on looking at a lot of these new areas. So first thing, we do things differently with new technology. So we might go about the business of distributing a policy in a new way. We might put it online. And some have said that one of the forms they came across recently, which they got quite upset about actually, was a claim form that was on paper. And when they went online, the customer was very happy and said it's online, and it was exactly the same form, and the first thing it said was name. So you think, hang on a minute, you know my name, I'm in your system, I've passed the sign-on tests, and yet you're still asking me the same things that are on that form. That's doing things differently. But doing different things is populating that form without it being a form in a bunch of sensible questions that could even be articulated through voice, rather than having someone go through the structured approach that we might have wanted or needed when we had paper. So first we do things differently, then the whole framework of what we're about changes, and ultimately we do different things. And if we can see that coming, if we can see the difference between the one and the other, then we've got a fighting chance of being successful in this next era. Yeah? It's just a question of seeing what does it really mean for us to do things differently. We've seen this huge change taking place in the consumer world. We've seen as much beginning to take place now in the B2B world around platforms, where nothing is owed from one side of the platform to nothing being owed on the other side of the platform. So individual customers be able to access enormous choice through platforms being created. It was great to hear the mention of platforms being part of the offer by Majesco, because this is the way that customers increasingly are feeling empowered and able to choose and pick and choose all manner of product to serve their needs, as opposed to going to individual suppliers perhaps in the old days. Most customers want new models using new technology. We're not really that happy and content to have the old model delivered to us using the new technology. So here are a list of technologies that probably all of you are facing today in one way or the other. And I want to sort of fairly quickly go through some of these and just look at them slightly differently, if I may. So the first one's social. We've all got social media. It started off in the marketing department. We now use it for our Dungeons and Dragons internal systems, so we can find things and share them across the company. But what I would say to you, how many of you use email as a communication tool inside the firm? Great. It's about 42 years old. And look around and see what else do you use that's 42 years old or thereabouts. I now know an insurance company that is global, who have 19,000 people internally who no longer use email internally, and they use a form of social media. And they're saying productivity has gone through the roof. With these sort of tools where we coalesce around a problem or a business issue or a customer issue or a market or a segment, they are much better at organizing data, organizing information, introducing new people, managing security than email was ever designed to do. Even if you have threaded streams, you're not sure you've got everything you need to involve somebody new. And we need that partnership. We need new people coming in to think things through differently, and we need to know we're safe. So social media is much more about how you run the firm, not just how you share your knowledge. And of course, It's writ large that it's about sharing your capability with others in a way that people want to consume, which is via social media. So that's one. A lot of the young kids are dead keen on social and get a lot of their reference from social tools of one sort or another that are constantly changing. And you can tell how cool you are depending on what name you trot out over drinks. And I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of names. I don't want to make anybody feel awkward, but it starts at one end and ends up the other end. But these things will always morph and change as we go through life. But social and the way we use social could ultimately end up with it being a communications device leading to product sale or proposition sale. So it's going to change quite dramatically in a few years. Of course, most of what we send across the internet will be digital, or is digital, but it will be video. So it's more video, it's more sound, and of course we distributed it on remote devices of one sort or another. And that's just a given over this next few years. That is the means by which mostly we want to communicate. And mostly it's becoming two-way, away from digital models. Increasingly we'll use social VR, so social virtual reality. We'll increasingly engage with customers or groups of customers or create scenarios where we're engaging with real people but using avatars in those worlds, thanks Denise, using avatars in those worlds to represent us, and we'll engage with real people or segments in an interactive way online. So we're probably doing that already, yeah? Told you, it's all common stuff, I know that. Here's what we think is a sort of current device. It doesn't matter what the number or the version is, but it's a handheld device of one sort, and we're gearing for it, and it's brilliant. Increasingly, if you look at something like the advert for Secret, I know Secret doesn't really work like this, or look like this, or even work at all, actually, but there are devices that are increasingly going to mean they're waterproof, we can keep them with us all the time, and what they give us back really is a hand. So they increase our productivity 50%. There's no holding a device. It's all on our wrist, it's on our device. We all have our watch, yeah? We have an Apple Watch of some sort, we've got a device, yeah? You don't get your phone out when it rings, do you? That's so yesterday. You don't get your phone out of your handbag, it's so yesterday. You look at your device, do I want to take that call? Is it important? That update's really interesting, and you move on. Do we do that? We're doing something different, we're not doing the old thing. It's very